Hey guys, Matt here, just apologizing that we weren't able to record a new episode for you this week. So instead, we've gone back into the original episodes we recorded for the podcast that have yet to be released, and we're going to be releasing one of those these weeks. So the formatting and audio quality might not be what you're used to, and we apologize for that. But due to some scheduling conflicts, we weren't able to get a new episode out. So we still hope you enjoy this. We had a really great conversation about Ascension, and you can always catch us here, our main show Tuesdays, and doing something nerdy on Fridays, whether that's D&D, a book review, or a deep dive with a guest. So we hope you enjoy this episode, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Welcome back to the Lords of Lore podcast. I am Matt, and I'm joined by my two co-hosts.
Luca is me.
Will, I am.
Will, I am.
Whoa.
And this
No
is the
copyright.
podcast. Yeah. Well, okay, cut. Let's start again. This is the podcast for all things fantasy and sci-fi nerddom. Today, we are going to be talking about Ascension, more specifically, Apotheosis. Apotheosis?
Yeah.
Apotheosis,
Cool.
nice.
Mortal people becoming gods. I'm actually super excited to break this down with you guys because I think we're going to get pretty sweaty. So, what is Ascension? The act of ascending, ascent, an act of ascending upward movement, a rising movement, movement upward from a lower to higher state, degree, grade, or status, advancement, the act of climbing or traveling up, lifting up, as you know, generally. Apotheosis, the highest point in development of something, culmination or climax, but more specifically, the elevation of someone to divine status, deification. So, how to begin? Let's just get your opening thoughts on the concept as a whole. Luca, go ahead.
I like it. I think it's super cool when used in moderation. But also I am going to immediately disagree with that because I'm reading Malazan, where there's a lot of ascendance, and it's one of my favorite stories ever so far. So I like it.
Nice. And what about you, Will?
Yeah, I like it too. Again, big Apotheosis guy. No, I like it when it's done like properly, I guess, sort of say. I mean, that's with everything. It's definitely like it could either be like super corny if it's written badly, but if it's done well, I think it always turns out pretty well, I think.
Yeah.
And also, like, the way I see it is like there's like two sides to it. It's either like the ultimate end goal for something, or at least a character's path of development, or it's sometimes like an option kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point too, and where in the character's story this ascension takes place, I think is huge. Like, let's get into some examples to sort of go over this point. Like, if we talk about, like, say, Kratos, right, God of War, that doesn't happen. Like, that happens pretty early on for him, and then we see him struggle with descending and ascending, multiple different times. Whereas, like, for other characters, it's the end goal, or it's the very beginning of the story, or it's somewhere in the middle, and then we see how they live on as a god type of thing. But what are some of you guys' favorite examples, or favorite characters rather, of this sort of storytelling device or plot point?
For me, one of my favorite examples was Warbreaker, which was a Brandon Sanderson novel. Essentially, like, the sort of like the basis of the society is Ascension. It's like a super common sort of in this world where the ruling class is a group of gods who are all ascendant mortals. So when a mortal dies, they can turn into a god in that world. And there's a character named Lightsong who you follow, who's like a god who doesn't believe he is a god. Like he has followers who believe in him, but he doesn't believe in himself as a god.
Oh wow.
So it's like a really interesting character. That was probably one of my favorite examples ever done that I've read. Lightsong from Warbreaker.
Cool. What is some for you, Will? Maybe not your full breakdown. We'll get into our deep dives a little bit later on, but some just examples that come off the top.
My personal favorites would probably be, I guess, spoiler warning for Bloodborne, but it would be there's like an option to basically turn into like an eldritch being to basically like join them, depending on like which like quests you follow through and stuff like that. That's one. Also, like in like the ending for like Fable 2, which I won't do a spoiler warning because it's been out for like 10 years. So come on. Yeah, I like Fable 2. Not so much as a god, but almost more of like, I guess, like the hero. But it's like kind of also like maybe more of like a demigod. And also the Divinity Original Sin, especially with number 2. Is also a big favorite. It's kind of similar to Fable and Bloodborne as well. But and of course God of War. I mean, that's all-time classic.
Yeah.
For Vidya.
That's like the main concept of that game. Like,
yeah.
Obviously God of War.
Or Skyrim. Or
I
like
have a few that's
Scroll.
Yeah. I have a few that stick out. Just came like spoilers. I'll skip the first one because I know one of you is actively consuming this content. But obviously, like we have examples from our own lore as human beings in sort of religious figures and stuff. We have our like messiahs and human-born people who then become deities and religious figures. But from lore, from pop culture, Thanos is one, more so in the comics, that sticks out to me. And that's sort of on the other side of like not our hero character, definitely a villain. There's that episode of Futurama where Bender becomes a god. That's an interesting look at it as well. But Lex Luthor and All-Star Superman, sort of like just these random instances of like mortal gaining extreme power and then being like, oh, this is what it's like. I don't want this at all. I think those are super interesting as well. And then I was actually watching, I don't know if you guys have had a chance to see the Zack Snyder Justice League. It's 4 hours, so strap in. But with the cyborg character in that, they sort of pitch him as if he's like a being because he can interact with like the internet and all technology. They pitch him sort of like as being this godly being who has control over like almost anything, really. So I thought that was an interesting take too. It's like a younger person who's just like, hey, now you can do anything you want. The real challenge is going to be not doing it. Have fun. And then seeing how he sort of struggles with that and where he makes exceptions, kind of stuff like that. But let's start to break it down. How do you feel? We know you guys are both fans of Apotheosis, but big Apotheosis guys here on the podcast. But how do you feel? How to phrase this? What are your thoughts about it as a concept to tell a narrative? Like, do you think sort of like how we talked about with magic systems, it can be like abused if not done right, or sometimes it just falls flat? What do you think are the key things that go into it to make it really work for you guys?
I feel like it needs a strong magic system to begin with. I feel like it's sort of a natural direction that any fantasy sort of like magical elements go towards, because it's like, what do you even think of as like the next level, any like evolution of the human consciousness or state or whatever, like it becomes like a godlike being from our perspective. So it's like in the natural evolution of any sorcerer mage type character, like if they were to make that next evolution. So as long as like the setup pays off, like the magic pays off and the reasoning is there, like if they turn into this being, it almost always hits home, as long as like everything else before it is good. But if everything else before it is bad, then it'll fall flat every time.
For sure. Yeah. What about you, Will?
Yeah, I like definitely like kind of like having like a clear like if the audience has like a clear understanding as to like how someone becomes elevated to this divine status.
Okay.
I don't think it necessarily has to be with like through magic, but that's definitely a good one. But like what comes to mind is like the Berserk series with the God Hand, which are all villains, but they kind of like operates through like the power of like human belief, which is like pretty popular, which is like pretty common as well in like the different like Warhammer series and stuff like that. Whereas if a mass amount of like humans believe someone's a god, then they kind of become one. But so like I like stuff like that. But if it's just like, I don't know, someone does like once like I don't know, makes like a sacrifice or something like that, and then like next you know they're like Superman and can do anything, then it's kind of cheesy, I think.
See, I won't say I disagree with you guys in that
But you do.
I don't mind there being a way to explain how someone gains godhood. Obviously, like if you can explain it, then the sort of setup will pay off at the end. But I'm actually a fan of one of the characters I brought to deep dive later on, having no idea how this person has obtained godhood. And even like, I guess my experience playing Dragon Age, I've only ever played Inquisition, so I don't have a background on some of the characters. But when you first encounter the villain of that game, and it's this person who tells you they've gone to the seat of the old gods, and you better pray that he succeeds in his mission because you won't like what you saw there, type of thing. And it's like, what? What are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. But like, it builds up the mystery. And for me, I think it's sort of like to what you were saying, Will, like, or gods get their power from people believing in them. And so whether we know how they got that way or not is almost irrelevant to me. Because as long as people worship them as if they were gods, then they already have the power of gods. Whether you look at that like literally, like people believing them give them some sort of like magical power, or just like, you know, people believing in them gives them power over them because they'll be more willing to bend to their will, type of thing. So I think it's like, it's almost more interesting to me when there isn't an explanation. But I think, to go with you guys there, when you have your main character become a god and it's not explained in that way, that's where it gets into issues for me. Examples stick out like most shonen anime. I'm sorry, this is a point I'm always going to harp on, like Dragon Ball Z, where it's like, he got so powerful he became a god. Why? Oh man, we did 3, 4, and 5 in the last episode, so we have to go one step off again. Yeah, I am not a fan. But yeah, what do you think about having ascension through like mysterious means?
Probably depends what mysterious means is. Like if it's completely like no explanation, like that's honestly good. Like it can be super cool. Like some of those interesting characters can be like, you don't know where they come from, why they're powerful. It's like, what are their motivations? What are they even thinking? Like those are some of the coolest like side characters or even villains that are written.
Yeah, especially as like antagonists, because it's like, well, then how do we go for what they care about? We don't know anything about them. They just showed up with this power, and like, okay. What about you, Will?
I like, now that you mentioned Dragon Age, what also I kind of think is like almost like a secondary or a secondary set of Apotheosis / Ascension through Solus.
Yeah.
Like he was an elven god, but like he kind of like lost his powers, right? So then it's like he's like it's like I kind of like it in that instance because we're not exactly like told as to like how or why like they're
but
gods.
it also, sorry to cut you off, but just to add before you go further here, the interesting thing there is that, was he an elven god, or was he an elven leader that people raised up so that like if you're from the outside looking in, you're like, oh, he must have been their god. But in his perspective, he's just a dude who they entrusted with their sort of leadership.
But he also has like so much experience and power that maybe he is like divine. I mean, like he basically like was kind of like a god, but then like was basically just like hibernating for so long. So it's kind of like throughout the main game of Inquisition, like he's kind of like building up that power, especially with the DLC. But
yeah, for sure.
But like it's still kind of not explained very well.
Yeah, that's one I actually didn't think of Solus at all when we were preparing for this. That's a really good example of like slowly sort of starting to peel back the layers and be like, this guy doesn't seem like a normal dude.
And maybe he wasn't a god, and maybe like throughout the game he actually is on the path of becoming one.
Yeah. There's a similar sort of example. There's a character called Vecna from like D&D lore, stuff like that. But basically just like a necromancer turned what do you call it, like a lich basically. And then wants to get to the next step. Basically makes himself a god through like all this weird sort of magic. But like he does it in a way that the other gods can't do anything about it. And he's just like, okay, I'm a god now, deal with it. And he becomes like the god of secrets and whispers or something. Super dark character, but like really cool way of like, I'll defy the gods and do what I want, because why wouldn't I? I can. I have magic. Okay, let's get into some deep dives. I've been waiting to hear this all week. We'll start with you, Will. Give us your best, or your favorite rather, story of Ascension.
I definitely I like the Bloodborne series is my favorite, because like in that series, like whether or not you're like it takes place within a dream world, like you're just a regular character that you create. And then I mean it's made by the same guys who make Dark Souls, so it's very like the world is like very, very vague, and like you kind of have to find stuff out like on your own. But like as the story progresses, and like you make your way throughout the world, like you start to learn about like how the city that the story takes place in had like a connection with these like eldritch beings. They just call the old ones, that they're that also like this relationship between the people, like the city's inhabitants and like these eldritch beings, like it kind of goes on to like form like this like specific like religion and church. And like as you like kind of like as like the story progresses, so to say, like towards the end, if you do a certain amount of tasks, which is basically killing certain eldritch beings or like lower class eldritch beings, then you have the option towards the end to actually like turn into one.
Oh wow.
But
also, like, you the player can ascend.
Yeah, so like your option is to basically leave the dream, or like you could just stay and like help guide people through the dream later on, or you could actually just ascend.
Oh wow.
Of course, like the ascension one is like the hardest ending to get, but and like what I like about it most is like the art style, I guess. A lot of the eldritch beings are like very, very like Lovecraftian inspired, so like tentacles and eyes and stuff like that, like kind of like gross looking, and like communicate telepathically. So like when you do ascend, there's another character who like picks your body up, and then like you've actually turned into an infant old one, which is just like it looks like a sea slug. So like it's like tentacles and stuff like that, which you'll later grow on into, as it's implied. But I think that's like one of my favorite ones, just because it's kind of like, are these creatures like divine beings, or are they just like weird space aliens? Like,
yeah,
are they just like mutants? I don't know.
Sort of reminds me of like the original biblical depictions of angels, like just these weird wheels with eyes on them and then wings, like nightmare fuel.
Yeah,
but to be like that's what people worshipped as angels, and like in our history. That's so strange, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, like that's what I liked about it too, just because like when I was playing through, I didn't know about that option. And I found out about it like later on, and then it's like there's like a lot of questions that like I like in that instance, that like the vagueness I think like helps in like, and the mystery helps with the story. So like I kind of liked it just because it, like you're almost kind of like left wondering like why would I even take this route?
Yeah.
And then like when you turn into like a sea slug, it's just like, oh, okay, that's cool. But then
Does the
like,
game end there? Like that's just a cutscene type of thing?
yeah, like
Oh
it's
wow.
just it's like super like mysterious, and like people can like get that option without even realizing what they're doing and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But like I think in that instance, like the world is done so well that like, yeah, you can do that kind of stuff, and like I think the mystery works with that. Yeah,
Cool.
that's my main one.
Nice. How about you, Luca?
Oh man, favorites. I have another example that I loved from Warbreaker, and it's
Okay.
like it's not really a mortal ascending. It's like so in the world of Warbreaker, the magic system has to do with like breath, which like represents sort of like life force. And these gods that are the ruling class, like they need one breath per week to sustain themselves. And every living person is born with one. And you don't die if you lose it. You just like sort of like lose your sort of like luster and light.
Okay.
And then the more breaths you hold in yourself, the more the sharper your senses and the more magical abilities you have. And
How do
then
you
you
obtain
can
more?
they have to be given willingly. So there's a phrase that characters say in
You took
the
my breath away?
there's like something that the person says to give their breaths to whoever is accepting them. And then you can hold an unlimited amount in yourself, and the more you hold, the more powerful you are, and you can invest those breaths into other things and then bring them to life. And the rule in the world is like the more organic the material and the more it looks like a human form, the easier it is to invest.
Okay. Wow, that's
But there's one thing that was awoken that is a sword, so just like a normal black blade. And it was like this one woman who figured out which incantation to say and how much breath it would need to awaken a sword. But then what she created was like a godlike being that couldn't be destroyed, and it's just like a complete unintended consequence. And like this bloodthirsty sword was created, and it now is being carried by one of the like side characters in the story, and it's called Nightblood. And it's like I just love first of all, I love conscious weapons. Like I think that's super cool.
Man, you gotta read the Pilgrimage of Swords, man. That Anthony Ryan book. I think I'll send it to you again, but yeah, you'll like that. Go on.
Yeah, so Nightblood would be like essentially an awoken or like an ascendant sword, pretty much. Because it is like a god level, like a god in that world would fear Nightblood.
Wow.
Whereas Nightblood wouldn't fear being in the hands of any of the gods.
Oh wow. So it's sort of like I love it, but did it make its own consciousness, or does it take on that of the breath that was put into it?
So the woman who awoke it
Yeah.
essentially gave it consciousness.
Oh, okay. Just birthed it sort of into existence.
Pretty much, yeah. So
Wow.
she figured out what she had to say and how much breath essentially would require to awaken it. And nobody else has ever awoken like an inanimate object like that that's so far away from human flesh.
Wow.
Because it's been like refined and stuff, and then like there's like a character that carries Nightblood the whole time, and he doesn't like it, and it's like trying to figure out what it is type thing, and like it doesn't it doesn't remember what happened in the past clearly and all this stuff, and like it's like a brand new being that was created, so it's like an ascended metal almost. And it does appear in other works, but that is spoiler city, so I won't say anything about that. But, I mean, it's also a theory. It was not confirmed by the creator.
That's cool. Like, that's a cool origin for a sentient weapon, because usually you get like, oh, we put this god in the sword. But this is like, nah, this is what happens when you fuck around with like breath and inanimate objects. Like, that's super interesting. I'm thinking of like a post-apocalyptic world where like machines rule, and it's like, oh, they weren't built by humans, they're just like weird spiritual sword things. That's so cool.
Nightblood's so cool. Like, this is the way the guy fights with it. Like, essentially anybody who sees it is like drawn to it, and he just gives it to them. Like, he does not care. He like throws it and just like leaves a room, and then like comes back and finds it later, because like anybody who picks it up, like, it just like consumes them.
Oh,
like
wow.
Black tendrils of smoke like reach out of it and like consume the person's life force.
That's a warlock pack blade if I ever heard one, man. That's sick.
But then like the mentality of the sword is like so childish, because it's like such a brand new being.
Yeah.
And it just like, I love that contrast so much. It's just so well done too, because Sanderson is just like a wizard.
Man, we might need to do a whole episode on sentient weapons.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
Awesome. I brought the Raven Queen from D&D lore. I was first introduced to it through Critical Role, of which I've seen almost every episode, because that's how my life's going. But super interesting character. And going back to like what we were talking about earlier, a character whose divinity or ascension is very much a mystery. All that's sort of been said, as far as I know, is that used to be a human woman, and through some sort of tragedy or some sort of ritual or something. Actually, I'm not even sure if they know she was human, but some woman obtained godhood. Some people say she killed the god of death and took their spot. But she's the Raven Queen because she lives in the Shadowfell, which is like this dark gray reflection of the material plane. And she's like the Lord of Ravens, and she watches every soul as it passes from the material plane into the afterlife. And at her whim, she'll sort of pluck souls for tasks or missions, or just to look at. And no one knows why. No one, like, she doesn't speak to anyone. She's never spoken. Only to these souls we think she's spoken. And so she'll just randomly like take somebody. There's even like legends of her like taking a soul who just went through like a terrible tragedy and reincarnating them and putting them in a position to relive the same tragedy over and over and over again. And nobody knows why. Like, there's no explanation. It's not like she enjoys it. It's just something she does. And we're not sure. There's this group of elves who got trapped in this dark reflection world. And so they've become like weird gray versions of themselves. And if you're there in that world, you would see one elf, let's call him Jeff. He would look like he's like 300 years old, like a human 300, like emaciated, like decrepit. And then if you brought that same Jeff into the normal material plane, he would look like a spry young man. So there's like implications that like, and the Raven Queen, I should say, she looks super young all the time, like a youthful woman. And so there's like implications that like she's stealing life from her people while keeping them alive, and they are like devout to her. And yeah, I don't know. It's just a weird ascension sort of story, like that they made this character have come from mortality to become the goddess of death. It's just such a weird and interesting choice to me. I have no idea. Like, I definitely will use this character in my own D&D campaigns, because like, I feel like as a DM and as a storyteller, I guess, when you're able to just do things because no one knows how this god works, but still have like a theme and sort of like rules, I guess you could say, to how they work, or standard sort of practices. I think that just adds to like the world building of been like, and the other gods of the pantheon and D&D and stuff, they don't fuck with her at all. They don't trust her. They don't talk to her. They don't, like, if you talk about her, they'll be like, nah, like, you got to go ask someone else. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want the smoke. Like, they're afraid of her, but they also don't consider her one of their own. So it's really strange, like, how she got to be where she is, and it's never explained. And I think unless some changes come in like next editions and stuff, they probably never will, just because like that's sort of the intrigue of the character. But yeah, that's one of my favorite examples of like mortal. Of course, like if you're DMing games, you could make up your own reason why. So I have my own canon reason of how she became the goddess of death, but if you play one of my games, you'll just have to figure that out. We'll swing back to you, Will.
So like I came up with a short list, I guess, of more of like just like a few just like random faves as well. So the first one would be King Arthur, for if we're gonna do like real world lore. Yeah, I mean he practically ascends to, I guess, divine status within like the British myth and sagas and stuff. I mean, he's not necessarily a god, but he's definitely like I don't want to say like worshipped, but like almost like venerated, sort of, in just like in British myth and folklore. I mean, that one, like it is one of my favorites just because I love like Arthurian stuff, but it also like kind of toes the line of being like corny in that it's like a chosen one scenario type thing, like the boy who pulls the sword from the stone. But I'll allow it personally. Yeah, the second one would have to be like the Song of Roland, the titular character being Roland. He comes from like Frankish myth, from kind of around, like sort of around the same time as like Arthurian stuff, but like in France/Germany. So like in that we have like the story goes like Charlemagne, like the first Holy Roman Emperor and stuff like that. There's like the whole conquest of Spain, and then Roland happens to be like one of the like one of his knights, kind of. And just because he basically is like the rear guard, and then he goes on like a suicide run basically to buy everyone time. And then I don't know why I like it. I just always thought it was like kind of a cool story, because in the end, again, no spoilers, this is like 1,000 years old at this point, but like in the end he blows like a war horn, and like for some reason his like head explodes, and then he like ascends to heaven as a divine like being kind of thing. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not sure exactly why I like it. It's just I always thought it was like super metal that he did that. But it's kind of like a terrible trade-off, because like one of the criticisms I've always heard is like, well, why didn't you just like retreat kind of thing? But I don't know. Yeah.
I think that's cool though, when we talk about like mortals becoming gods, that they don't like, there's no additional knowledge they're granted with when they pass over.
Yeah.
That they're still the same person, just now they have incredible powers.
Yeah.
But I think that's sort of one of the key ingredients, because then they're bound to make the same mistakes, regardless of if they're godly or not. If they held grudges in their mortal life, those grudges would probably still be held in their ascension, and all their flaws as well, their emotions and stuff like that.
Yeah, and like it's kind of cool as well, because like in the Divine Comedy, like he like props up as well. Like it's kind of cool because he, even though like the stories are like, again, like 600 years apart, but like it's kind of cool that you get to see like this character pop up in like another work of media, which I always thought was kind of cool. And like, and in that instance, like he is kind of like this divine being as well. I think more so it was like kind of like a cultural aspiration, like an example of like being virtuous and stuff, like in Holy Roman Empire days kind of thing, Middle Ages. Fun fact: he was also called he was like the first person to ever be given like the title of paladin in history.
Oh wow!
So that's where like a lot of like pretty much like if you think of like a D&D paladin, like stereotypical, that's pretty much like what like Roland was.
Okay.
Or in Spanish, Orlando. Yeah. And another quick one is
writes down new paladin idea.
Yeah.
Orlando Roland.
Yeah, another quick one I think is from the game Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, again from software that also made Bloodborne. There's also like kind of like this one option where it's called like the Shura option, which is basically like your character gives into his hatred, and instead of like becoming a god, so to speak, it is definitely like a divine being. Like it's almost like the spirit of hatred kind of thing. Like it's kind of like more of like an evil option route. But I always like that one. And it's like he uses like the character can like use this basically turn into like this like demon, like evil spirit, like demigod kind of thing. But at the same time, it has like a terrible cost on like himself and like those around him, which I thought was kind of cool. It's almost like a descension as opposed to ascension. Yeah, those are just quick ones I thought of.
Any others from you, Luca?
Yes, I have an interesting example of this concept from Malazan. It's not per se like a mortal ascending to godhood, because this world does have like specific gods that do ascend. This is like just an interesting use of this as a narrative device almost. So there is a group called the IMAS, which are like one of the 4 founding races of this planet, and they, as an entire race, ascended to immortality in order to ensure their victory in the war against their nemesis, the Jaggart, which are another one of the founding races. So they're like a group of mortals that all gained immortality by essentially combining their souls with the magic system in Malazan is called warrens. They're like worlds that you draw magic from, and they combine their souls. It's not specifically described how the ritual went, but their warren was called Telan, and they combined their souls with their warren and became the Telanimas, and they became essentially immortals that could use the power of their warren freely now. So they did this because they no longer needed to eat, and they could travel through the warren without having to physically cross distances. And then, so they survived 300,000 years until the events of Book 1. So in Book 1, they've already been around for 300,000 years. So there's just like an example of these once mortals that are now just, essentially they look like undead. They look like zombies because their flesh is like withered away over the years, and their like mentalities have changed and their goals have changed, and they're like, they sacrificed all of their sort of mortal needs and desires to fight this war, becoming immortal, not really ascending, but it's sort of that device. Like they've become something greater than the average mortal because of their viewpoint now. Living 300 millennia would
sounds sort of if you're familiar with like the Githyanki, Githzerai from D&D, similar. Like they had to change who they were to beat the Illithids, like the mind flayers, who had to like enslave them, and in doing so become like this entirely different race. But yeah, it's super interesting. Like not just a character, but a group of people who've ascended to a different state of being. And I guess it's always why, right? Like to save your race, that's a pretty good reason, I think. But at what cost, kind of thing. Like, does it make sense to save your race if you're now zombie shadows of what you once were, type of thing? Like,
I mean, their biggest enemy was like a sort of other creature that is similar to like an ascendant, like these Jaggarts or Jaga. It's like spelled Jaghut, but it's pronounced like Jaggart.
okay,
almost Jagut. Anyway, they're like these creatures that are really solitary, except every once in a while, one amongst them will be born that will turn into what they call a Jaggar's Tyrant, which is like a creature that is also has access to their warren, which has to do with ice and suppression and sort of preservation, and they become warlords that that have like an instinctive need to dominate every living creature around them.
Damn.
So they would enslave anything, like including their own race and any other living creatures around them. They would enslave them, and then that's what brought the IMAS together to become the immortals needed to destroy these people. But I also have one side example.
Yeah, go for
which
it.
I can't get into too deeply just because it's major spoilers for this book. And it's a standalone book. I think Matt, I told you about it. It's called The Sword of Kaigen.
Okay, yeah. This is like Eastern themed fantasy.
Yeah, it's like based on mostly Japanese culture with a magic system that's essentially like waterbenders from Avatar.
Okay, cool. I'm sold, dude.
like
You got me already.
Yeah, exactly. Like I don't want to get into anything at all because it's not specifically like a character that changes and ascends. It's a character that from the start is like this. But it's just like it's done so well. Like this character that isn't entirely human, there's something more. Not essentially like a god. They're not immortal or anything, but the power that they have within this world makes them something more, and like what they can do with that power, and just like it just hits so many spots so perfectly. Like I just love that story so much. And since it's a standalone one book, like I cannot recommend it enough. Like listen to it or read it. Like it's just so good. We got to do a deep dive on that.
I'll order it. I have a couple credits on Audible. I'll order it right after the show. I think, okay, so we've touched on like descension a bit. I know I don't know if we were prepared for this part, but do you guys have any examples of descension that rival sort of your favorite ascension characters?
We need a second.
Like characters like losing their godhood, I guess.
Not, or I guess that's the wrong word. We could do that as well. That's actually interesting, but more so characters that don't become gods, become something darker, like something evil. But I guess then it sort of all depends on your definition of God, because most people, when they say God, will think of like benevolent, but you know, depending on what mythology or pantheon you're working with, that's all a matter of perspective. Like even the like Nordic gods, I guess, they're not good people. Like most of them suck ass, but they're gods technically. So
yeah. I guess it would. Yeah, I mean, like it also depends on like what's your, I guess, like thoughts on like the definition of evil. For example,
true.
That comes to mind is like Talos from the Elder Scrolls.
Yeah.
Like,
so that's when you would say ascended to like malevolent.
If you're non-human, yeah.
Oh wow. Okay, go off.
Because like
I'm interested.
I mean, like he basically like created like the third empire of humanity in Cyrodiil, or
Praise Talos.
I mean, in Tamriel, I should say.
Yeah.
But especially in Cyrodiil, like man basically just like murdered every single like non-human, which is like kind of like it's kind of strange because like in Cyrodiil, which is like the main setting for Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, that used like there was like basically like a group of elves, I guess like an ethnicity of elves that had like enslaved humans, but then like Talos just like came down like swinging down from the mountains and basically just like annihilated everyone there. So like, and like I think that's why a lot of I think that like drives some is like one of the driving points as to like why like the Thalmor in Skyrim like kind of want to get rid of him. But yeah,
and I think like that game does a really good job, whether you consider this a good thing or not, of painting the Nords, Stormcloaks, and especially Talos as victims and like the good guys, basically.
Yeah.
Whereas when you look at it through any other lens besides playing through Skyrim your first time, Like, these motherfuckers suck. All of them. They're all assholes. The Nords are xenophobic, anti-immigration, and whatever. The Stormcloaks are much the same. And Talos was a genocidal maniac who basically just the biggest racist of all time. And they got friggin' monuments of him. The elves come through and they're like, hey, it would be cool if you didn't like worship the dude who's we all know is a human who murdered all of our people. And the Nords are like, oh, they're taking our jobs.
Yeah, well, because like especially like if you like go into like the deep lore for like the Elder Scrolls, like especially with Talos, because there's like tons of material on that. Like even like his like beginnings, like his like the way he turns into like this divine being is like also pretty questionable. Like there's like no like solid background for it. There's like one thing, like one interpretation is that like he actually like killed like some of his closest generals and basically like so for example, like he like forced the dwarves to make like this or like or more so like stole from the dwarves like this like massive like I guess like Gundam type thing that had like this big like crystal in it, and he basically like forced several like one interpretation is he forced like several of his closest generals / friends to like go into it to basically power the thing. And then like what this like
is that the machine that's also like responsible for the disappearance of dwarves?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
There's that's like a whole other topic because they might be inside that crystal, but it's called the Numidium, and basically its main power is to basically like well, so like the way the Elder Scrolls universe is made up is it's all just like one big dream, like technically. Like it's called like it takes place like in what's called
even in my dreams I can't escape racism.
It's called like the Godhead is like the main universe, which is basically just this being that's sleeping. And then what the Numidium can do is basically just say like it essentially just shouts the word no at something and then it just like gets erased.
Oh yeah.
So like I mean like that's how like Talos basically just like schmurdered everyone in one interpretation of how Talos became Talos. Yeah, so like he could definitely be seen as villainous from that. Yeah, and like he had like he basically like but he like attained like these like god powers to basically affect creation like on his own. So like one of the main things that he did in the Elder Scrolls lore is like he actually changed the geography of Cyrodiil, because like in Cyrodiil we see it as like this like cosmopolitan type like I almost want to say like a Mediterranean type climate, like an area that's been so like impacted by humans, it's been changed by them over the years. But it's like unlike the real world where it's taken like thousands of years of people doing this stuff, he basically just like turned this whole region in from like a rainforest into like this setting / like climate that's like hospitable for humans, I guess. So yeah, but that's definitely like one of like the more darker interpretations of Talos.
This guy went to Lebanon and turned it into Alberta. This is kind of thing, right? So all the boys could come through and have a good time. Yeah,
more like the Amazon, I guess.
Yeah. That's interesting in that like how he's built up, because I think for a lot of people your first experience with the Elder Scrolls would be Skyrim, and in that game it's definitely like he's built up like this is our god. He's the ninth one, right? He's the ninth god, but then when you sort of dive deeper into that game, you sort of get to see other perspectives on who he is, and then to go back into like the deep lore of Elder Scrolls and be like it's very much still up for debate on whether he was a dude, normally just like a plain dude, a dude who somehow got powers, a dude who got powers through nefarious ways. It's super interesting in that there's no like concise agreement on like whether this guy was a piece of shit or not.
Yeah, and like but like it's kind of cool also how like I think in the case of Talos, more so than like the other divine gods in the Elder Scrolls, is that belief definitely takes like plays a role in his power, because you can like your character can still receive blessings from Talos. And
Right.
I believe in Morrowind, which is the third game, like he even makes like an appearance as like an avatar type thing.
Wow.
He appears as like this like Empire like legionnaire type character.
But you gotta ask, like, is that a divine interaction you're having, or is that some weird dwarven mechanical magic type of thing of him being able to like project across time and space? Like,
Yeah, but yeah, that's one thing. But he also had he also had like the power, like he was like a dragonborn as well. I think that's
Right.
definitely confirmed. So he does have like other powers outside of that. It's just he used I guess the interpretation could be that he was like power hungry maniac emperor type dude who just wanted to conquer everything.
Power hugger maniac emperor type beat.
Yeah.
What about you, Luca?
For
Or thoughts on Talos first, I guess.
I mean, I didn't know. That was all new for me. Like that was an
Awesome.
education on Talos for me. Like I didn't really get into. I didn't read any books in Skyrim, you know, like where you learn that lore. And that priest guy was super annoying. I didn't like him. And I always played a dark elf, so like I could never join the Stormcloaks. Like,
see,
if you go to Windhelm once, like, nah,
yeah.
I don't think so, man.
Yeah.
Wait! Just sorry to cut you off. I just realized I made an error. So
no, it's too late. You canceled, bro. This guy don't know the lore. You're out.
No. I was confusing it. So like, with humans being enslaved, that was from the first empire with Saint Alicia. So like, but like there were like, I guess, tribes / just like groups of humans like that kind of stemmed from that era. But I mean, like regardless, he conquered and murdered everyone. So, but like humans weren't enslaved. But yeah, I just realized my mistake. But I mean, again, regardless, he murdered like the entire continent.
Yeah. Go on, Luca.
But as an example of a character that like descended, I can't think of like a specific example of somebody that actually like. For me, there's an example in Hunter x Hunter. I don't know if you guys have seen it to the end.
Just like the first season, maybe.
Okay, well,
I wasn't really watching.
Yeah, this would be major spoilers, I guess. Just in general terms, there's a character that, in order to defeat an enemy, they swear a covenant and essentially gain a tremendous amount of power for a short amount of time in exchange for a severe price to be paid afterwards, which is sort of like that, like a character that's been like our protagonist or one of them the whole time, like somebody we've seen in like a positive light just accept a very negative sort of source of power in order to overcome something. That could sort of be seen as like a fall in some way. But you guys haven't seen it, so I can't get into
tiptoeing, yeah.
There is also in Malazan, there's an example of, again, in general terms, like characters that ascend in order to avoid a worse fate in their mortal lives.
Okay.
Like that is their way out of a situation. I don't know the details yet because it's like a major event that happens. And I think it's explored in like the fifth or fourth. But it has been confirmed that they did ascend in order to avoid essentially death in the mortal realm. But whether or not they plan to ascend at that moment or not is like still unconfirmed. That's a cool example of that.
I think a popular one, I guess, from pop culture would be like Thor, when he gets stripped of his powers. That's like, I guess, a descent. But one of like, I get like the villains who sort of like ascend. Obviously, we mentioned like Corypheus and Vecna and stuff like that. I did mention though Lex Luthor in All-Star Superman. I think it's one of like, because it happens for maybe like, I've watched the movie, so it happens for a very short amount of time at the end of the movie. He somehow, I can't remember all the superhero nonsense, but he basically gets the super serum of Superman, and he can become Superman for 24 hours, basically. And he takes it and he defeats Superman, and he's sort of like relishing his victory, and he begins to see like everything on like a molecular level, and seeing things how Superman sees it. He starts like hearing the voices of everybody like crying out, the way that Superman does. And he starts to realize like, oh, I can see this all now. I can fix everything. I can make the world a better place. I can save everyone. But then he starts to go through like, he basically starts having like a panic attack, I guess. And then he gets duped by Superman. He runs out of time, kind of thing. And he says, no, like, you have to give me the serum back. I can help everyone. I can save everything. And Superman says to him, man, if you really wanted to do that, you would have done that years ago. Like, you're one of the most powerful people in the world. Like, if you really wanted to help people, you would have done it. So, yeah, I don't think so, buddy. Which is one of my favorite, like, things, because it asks the question, is the ascension necessary? So obviously for like some of the examples you provided, Luca, it is based off the magic system. Like, you have to, in order to combat these people or get these powers, you need to go to the next level type of thing. But I think with a lot of fantasy and sci-fi stories, that's sort of the question that gets asked, is like, do we need the gods to be good? Or do we need to be gods to be good? Or do we have the power to really make things better for people without godhood? Which leads to this final question, boys. If you were given the opportunity right now, skies, the heavens open up, a beam of light comes down, shines in on you, says, I'll give you this one opportunity. You may ascend right now. You only have 10 seconds to answer. Luca, what would you say?
I feel like I'd be too curious to say no.
That's a good answer. I agree. What about you, Will?
I guess, like, what would those powers entail?
You don't know.
Don't know. Probably, yeah.
Oh shit, whatever. And then just instantly your body transforms. You get eyes coming out of every fucking pore on your body. Tough luck, bud.
Wait. I actually, now that I think about it, one that comes to mind is Dr. Manhattan from
Oh yeah.
The Watchmen.
That's a really good one, yeah.
Because like that one, I kind of like that, in that like he becomes like such like a godly figure that he basically they definitely paint it in a negative light, like maybe not negative, but more so like realistic. Like, you can just like blink and then like everyone that you know would be gone, and it'd be like a million years later and you wouldn't even notice, type thing. Yeah, that's one that I just thought of.
Yeah, that's one that's, I again, on like the dark side of, like, he almost becomes like apathetic after obtaining godhood. I'm just gonna do my thing, because anytime I try to do anything, somebody gets upset. Which would also be one of the tough things about ascending into godhood, being like, where do you draw the line? Like, are you able to influence everything? And if so, why are there any bad things that ever happen ever? Like, should there be? And should you change them? Like, I think it's a really interesting question. And I think that's why it comes up all the time in literature, because I think it's something like no one really would, like, we all gave our answers and it was yes, but given time to think about it, I wonder, like, if you had to sleep on it, would it still be the same? Because, like, you're immortal. Do you want that? Like, that comes with its own cons as well. I don't know. Characters like Wolverine, where we sort of get to see like the bad side of immortality, where you just, living lives, watching everyone you love die over and over again, to a point where it's like, should you even love people? And if you don't, then what's the point? Like,
yeah, like kind of like Bran from like Game of Thrones, where you just become like so aware of like the world around you that you become less human.
Yeah.
So I guess in that way, he did kind of turn into like a god in or divine being in that like he was omniscient, I guess is the word.
And then so I know every episode we get back to season 8 of Game of Thrones, but
right,
that's why I think it's an interesting choice. I enjoy that they put him on the throne, because this is the least human character besides the dragons that we've seen throughout the, like, this guy has no emotions, doesn't have any ties to anybody.
He's just like a calculator, like sitting on the
yeah,
throne.
basically. And but they all agree that this is probably the best guy to lead, because you know, you can't really upset him because he doesn't care. Like, he's just going to do what's right, I guess. But like, where will that lead you? We don't know, but I don't know. It's interesting.
He would get assassinated so quick in season 2. Like,
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it would also like, I think like in that scenario, like someone like Bran, like they might become like too far removed, and like thus like become like almost like arrogant in their role. So it is definitely an interesting. I kind of wish there was like a follow-up season, had season 8 just like not been so terrible. Yeah.
We're gonna have to get into Game of Thrones one of these days. But anybody else have any closing thoughts on Ascension and the Apotheosis?
That's good stuff, man.
Big fans. Okay, good. Yeah, this has been the Lords of Lore podcast, the podcast for all things fantasy and sci-fi nerddom. So thanks for tuning in. I'm Matt.
I'm Luca.
And I'm Will.
And we are the Lords of Lore.